lot funny.
For 10 years now, or over 10 years, Tien and his founders have been speaking about the subscription economy. When you speak about the same thing for that long, there's only two types of people that you can be. Either you're lunatics or you're visionaries. And given how well subscription-based companies have done in the past 10 years, so just to give you an example, they're growing 10 times or 9 times quicker than the average company on the S&P 500. So given how successful those companies have been, I think we can safely say that they're visionaries rather than lunatics. So Tien was born in Taiwan, grew up in Brooklyn, studied engineering at Cornell before doing an MBA at Stanford. He's written a lot of funny things about his MBA, and he, to say the least, he seems to be a bit skeptical about the stuff he learned there. And one of the reasons is that during his MBA, he realized that everything he was being taught was about the product economy. And the product economy was a very different paradigm from the paradigm that we're living in now. So back then, everything was about finding a killer product and designing it, looking up the cheapest way to build it and then deliver it to consumers, and then shipping as many units as possible to those people. And that made a lot of sense because, potentially back then, because it was very hard for companies to know who their customers were, right? So you didn't know who the people who were coming into your car dealership were. You didn't know what use they were making of the CDs that you were giving them. And so it was really hard to adapt your offer and sort of upsell them or cross-sell them, etc. But when user data became ubiquitous, with the advent of internet-based services and stuff like that, that whole paradigm shifted. So, if you take a company like Spotify or a company like Uber, providing the entire world's music library isn't enough, right? They need to be curating playlists. They need to help you discover new tunes. They need to help you show what your friends are listening to. Same for Uber. A lot of people don't think of Uber as a subscription service, but there's a lot of things that do make it look like a subscription service. So they try to build a long-lasting relationship with you. They have your payment details. They know what you're doing every time you're on the app, where you're going. They know where your home is, where your work is. So they can they can serve you better and better. They're increasing their offer. So not only do they help you find rides, they're also helping you find bikes, scooters, even helping with delivery. And actually, I think Uber's piloting subscription businesses, subscription models in a lot of different cities. So this move is pretty common. But more interestingly, this isn't just for consumer products. So what I'm super excited for Tien to talk about is all these companies that you wouldn't expect necessarily to move towards subscription models. So things like Caterpillar, who the example which is going to be described later in the video I'm about to show you guys. Caterpillar changed its model completely, and now instead of thinking of its customers as people that it's selling construction equipment to, it thinks about them as people that they're trying to offer outcomes to. And so we're going to be covering a lot of things tonight. We're going to be covering Tien's time at Salesforce. We're going to be discussing what it's like to scale a company from 0 to now over 1,000 employees and his vision on leadership. We're going to talk about things like how you find your first clients as a SaaS business. And then hopefully we're going to talk about how some of you in the room can bring companies to IPO twice like Tien has. So without further ado, I'm going to show you the video quickly, and then we'll welcome Tien onto the stage.
When you look at the world, what do you see? People or things? Tools or activities? Products or customers? For a long time, the world's businesses had just one perspective. They saw the products, not the people. They were in the business of selling things. So that's what they did. Businesses sold and customers bought. You might call this the era of ownership. Businesses knew they had customers. They saw them every day, but they didn't really know their customers. And so they focused more on what they could sell them than what they wanted. And that was fine, until the thing you bought broke, sat idle, couldn't expand, or became obsolete. And then you had to buy a new one. And that was not what the customer wanted. And that's just sad. But here's the good news. There are a few companies that have had the courage to see the world in a new way. Mavericks, disruptors, reinventors, call them what you will. In just 10 short years, they have changed the way we all see the world. There's the automotive company in Detroit that when it looks at highways, no longer sees vehicles, it sees travelers. Ford. After 115 years and 380 million cars, it's hard to imagine this company changing the way it does business, but that's exactly what's happening. Or the world's leading construction and equipment manufacturer, Caterpillar, a company that no longer sees gigantic earth movers, but customers who need to move earth. Or how about the 70-year-old company known for crafting the most popular guitars in the world, that no longer sees instruments, but people who want to be musicians? That's what's happening at Fender. And these are just 3 examples. There are many more. Surf Air, who sees passengers instead of jets. The Guardian, who sees open minds rather than open newspapers. Serve Corp, who sees the work, not the place. Hive, who sees smart people instead of smart homes. And Royal Canin, who sees pets instead of pet food. Companies that have the vision to look at the world in a new way, seeing people, not purchases, delivering outcomes, not products. And this is changing the world for the better. You could call this the end of ownership and the rise of usership. We call it the subscription economy. So now, when you look at the world, what will you see?
I'm yet to meet someone who actually speaks like the person in the video, but I'm very curious to know when I will. So now please welcome Tien Tzuo to the stage.
Bonsoir.
So Tien, I thought it would be cool to start at the beginning of your life, which is after your MBA, because that's the real birth.
When it starts?
So after the MBA, you joined Salesforce, right?
There's actually 1 year where I worked at yet another company, a
Okay.
company called Crossworlds.
And so right after that, you joined Salesforce.
That's right.
And one thing that Salesforce was known for was sort of like the crazy marketing stunts that you pulled off. So there's one where you were doing demonstrations in front of your competitor's office. There's another one that's famous is when you put sales reps in the taxis of the people going to your competitor's conference.
That's right.
And I think like on top of showing how crazy you guys were at Salesforce, that really shows how hard it can be to get your first clients as a B2B SaaS company. And so I was wondering how you approached that when you started Zuora.
The crazy stunts, or how we got our first customers?
Both, I guess.
The two probably weren't too related. Actually, we have Kyle Christensen in the back that pulled off some crazy stunts here at Zuora as well, including protesting the Apple iPad. But the first customers, I would almost state it differently. I think the idea, I think a lot of life is you have to think about things backwards. Right, you have to think about things in the reverse of what the conventional wisdom is. And so the conventional wisdom might be you create a product and then you go find customers. I don't think it works like that, not in the early days. I think you start with a customer and you say there's a set of customers that have a pain point and I actually know who they are. And you can even test the idea. And so before we actually launched the product at Salesforce, we probably had about 200 people that were already signed up to join the beta if and when we released it. And at Zuora, we had a signed customer contract. I think it was for about $50,000 a year. And the contract was written to say, you obviously don't owe us any money until we deliver the product. But we had built a prototype yet, but we hadn't actually created the product. And so there's a certainty that you can go into the exercise with if you can start from the customer and understand what the demand is. I even know of a company that set up a fake website and took out a bunch of Google AdWords, right, for what they thought the need was. And just wanted to get a sense, if I pay for these Google AdWords, how many people actually come to the site, how many people actually click on, right, buy or demo, whatever the link was. And so you have a good sense of what the marketplace before you even get started.
Yeah, so I think that's a great way to speak about it, because we actually have companies who do the same thing with like direct-to-consumer products. So like instead of actually building the products and then trying to sell them, they just design them, do a couple Instagram ads, and then see like oh, this one converts a lot better, so I'm just going to build that product. And so what you're saying is that instead of building a product and going for your customers, you go speak to your customers first and then see what product you're going to end up building.
Yeah, so when we launched as Zuora, it was probably the summer of '08, we signed up, somewhere between 10 and 30 customers, depending on the time frame you want to look at, fairly quickly. And most of these were software as a service companies that were like us, right? We had an expertise of what you needed to do in order to scale these software as a service companies from the companies we were at, Salesforce and my co-founders from WebEx. And so that became our core set of customers, but that really helped drive the model. Back then, there was no Series Seed, and so you kind of go right into a Series A. And so I think our Series A was $6.5 million, and we closed that in December of '07. But we were able to really launch and close our Series B pretty quickly, about 9 months later, based on the initial traction of getting 30 customers up and running fairly quickly.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the book that you made a very explicit effort right at the beginning to not just have other SaaS companies as customers, and that you went out and reached out to a media company, a manufacturing company. Why do you think it's that important to have a diversified set of clients right from the start?
Well, you quickly become your customers, right? Or you become what your customers want, because at some point you can have all these customers that have a very specific demand. The other thing is, as much as you think you know what the product should be, you really don't, right? I mean, you have a rough sense of what it is, but once you get into selling to customers, they're going to have very specific needs that you have. And so if you over-index too much on a specific customer set, you wind up building a product for that customer set, and you don't really understand the broader market needs. And for us, and that might be okay depending on what it is. If you feel like you've got a homogeneous set of customers, that's a very, very big market, then insurance, government, whatever it happens to be, then maybe that actually works. For us, we didn't believe at the time that software as a service, only selling to software as a service companies was going to be big enough. In fact, quite the opposite. We're looking for big ideas, right? Our whole thesis at the time was we can see how we use the subscription-based business model to disrupt software, right? If you boil down Salesforce, it was about the new technology model, cloud, SaaS, but just as important, the new business model. I mean, Benioff still talks like that. But the leap of faith for us was this just software, right? Where was this subscription-based business model? Could it be anything? And when we took the leap and said, it really should be anything. It just takes time. It takes entrepreneurs. It takes innovators to figure it out. We said, well, that's a pretty big market then. And so if that's going to be the vision that says any company in the world can be a subscription-based business, and ultimately we want to service that, then we have to have a really broad product, right? And so let's go get a broad set of customers. And that did put a lot of strain on our company. Including if you think about the way B2B companies operate and B2C companies operate, yeah, there's some similarities, but there's also lots and lots of differences. And so absorbing that level of complexity was hard initially, but that was the thesis, right? Because we had to break through on that in order to build what we wanted to build.
Yeah, so I think it'd be really helpful for the people here to give an idea of how broad the companies that you're helping are. So the video mentions Caterpillar, it mentions Fender. Can you walk us through how you approach those companies or how they approached you, what the sort of dynamics are when you're literally transforming the way these businesses not only operate but view themselves, and sort of the culture shock that happens within those companies when you implement these subscription-based models? You
talk about the crazy marketing stunts in the beginning until you opened it. But I think there's a storyline. There's a narrative and storyline underneath these things, right? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to paint a big enough story. And then these marketing techniques are just how do we get the story out there, right? And so at Salesforce, if you kind of listen to Salesforce in the early days, they never talked about Salesforce automation. And our internal vision statement, Benioff talks about this V2 mom thing, if you read up on it, and the first V is vision. And that vision statement never had Salesforce automation. I don't think it even had CRM. And so it all talked about the end of software and what the end of software meant. And so if the broader narrative of Salesforce was the end of software, how do you convey that, right? And so I think the launch party, we put a bunch of salespeople in suits behind a fake jail, right, selling software, and just things like that, right, to kind of prove the point. For us, where we try to paint a big, broader picture of the world is moving towards a subscription economy, and what the implications are, and so that starts to draw companies in. Now, just as a micro example of that, we had a lot of technology companies. We started seeing that the media sector, newspapers, magazines, was a really interesting sector, and so we painted a picture of how journalism was dying, how free was destroying the industry. And then when Apple started basically trying to tempt newspapers to go onto their platform, that became a convenient target for us to go tell our story with, right? Because it's Apple, lots of attention, but they were trying to work with the newspaper industry. We had a contrasting view that we can actually put out there against, right? That was different than Apple's view. And so that's what we just tried doing. And I'll tell you, at first, there was no real newspaper product. It was just our standard product. But that storyline really captured the hearts and imaginations of a lot of the people in the industry. We started signing one customer, went to another one. And today we work with a lot of the newspapers and magazines around the world. So we tell, if you look at us, we actually have a fairly disciplined process for storytelling, where we have a top level storyline, a narrative. Christian over there at Room Republique knows this. And that is what we call the subscription economy. And then we have sub ones that map to that for different industries and different functions. So we have a storyline for tech, we have a storyline for media, we have a storyline for manufacturing and IoT. And we're constantly testing these and trying to tell our story in different formats.
Great, and so, I think that's a good moment to talk to you. Like, you're surprisingly bullish about manufacturing in the book, in Subscribed. You have a whole chapter, I think, that's devoted to IoT and how that's going to completely transform the manufacturing industry. And so I'm just curious if you could sort of detail that thesis a bit.
Yeah, so I guess first we actually wrote a book. So if you look at that top level narrative, and we have one for every industry, and we had one for the different departments in a company, that is the book, right? And so surprise, that storyline evolved over 5, 6, 7 years. It got more and more mature. At some point last year, we were like, we should just turn this into a book. It still took a lot of work to do that, but the book is out there now, and it really tells the story of the subscription economy in a way that allows us to get a reach. One of the chapters in the book is about manufacturing. If you look at the industries in the book, and you kind of clue into it, the pattern is simple. The pattern is the industries are hurting, and the subscription business model really let it rise, right? We saw that in the software industry, where it's a little further along the story there. But the software sector in 2006, 2007, people thought it was a mature industry that should pay out dividends. It was always going to be a single-digit growth industry at the time. And the shift to SaaS really brought it back. The music industry is the same thing, 15 years of decline ever since Napster. So the shift to Spotify and Apple Music started it rising again. So we said, we think the same thing is going to happen in the manufacturing industry. There's 40, 50 years of decline. But because every product is going to be a smart product, everything that we see happen in software, digital media is going to happen. These physical products, again, whether they're floors, whether they're chairs or tables or cars or appliances or the security cameras, right? They're all going to be connected to the internet. They're all going to be hooked into some AI cloud engine, and they're all going to be digitized. And we're going to see that revolution happen in manufacturing. Yeah,
you literally have an example about floor subscription.
So a big part of storytelling is you got to find the stories. This is actually a French company. It's a French company here that sells floors. And the first time we heard the stories, like, this has got to be one of our stories. But I think it was Philippe was in the San Francisco office and saying, I want you to come and talk to this company. I was like, sure. Like right now? Yeah, right now. Well, what do they do? Well, they sell floors. And I probably came out of a meeting with my engineers, right? I was like, well, there's containers. Maybe there's a new technology called floors. Some open source thing. He's like, no. They sell floors. They sell hardware, hardwood, tiles, cement. I was like, well, how is this going to work, right? How can you subscribe to a floor? So let's go talk to them. And the CEO told the story of how they put sensors underneath the floors, and they're collecting all this rich information. And the website's called Floor in Motion, and it was transforming the company. And so for probably a century, they would sell floors through resellers, construction companies primarily. But now they have these smart floors, and they've got consultants, and they've got like software developers trying to figure out what to do with these smart floors, and they're selling hospital applications, retail applications, right, public transport applications. And it was a transformational story for the company. And the CEO said, the floor, you hear about connected products, and he said the floor is the ultimate connected products because we are always connected to the floor because we're not birds, right? It's a very French thing, right? So is our takeaway. But it was a transformative story. And so we look at stories like that. We look at the stories of Caterpillar, right, to really show the world that where the world can go, right, which is these smart connected devices.
But there's one thing that you also mentioned a lot in the book, which is that there's one type of person that you need to educate a lot when you're transitioning towards a subscription economy or subscription model is investors. And Wall Street apparently had a very hard time understanding subscription-based businesses in the beginning, and you essentially had to teach them and build a model that made sense to them.
Yeah. Well, if you step back, there's so many startups in the room, right? And so there's lots and lots of ideas, and there's no right or wrong. But if you're going to try to build, just call it $1 billion company, right? Just to pick a number, but a big company, you need runway, right? You need a long runway because if companies are going to compound and you pick 30% growth, pick 100% growth, whatever you want, you need a sustained period of time for the revenues to grow to $1 billion, and so you need 10, 15, 20 years of runway to build these companies. And so what you look for is some discontinuity in the marketplace, typically caused by technology, right? Something new in the marketplace that invalidates all the existing solutions, all the existing incumbents, right? Because that gives you a chance to start something new, and it gives you a runway because the existing incumbents can't wake up one day and say, well, that's kind of interesting, and just kind of take it over, all right? And so you look for that. For Salesforce, it was the internet, right? Everything's related to the internet in some way, right? But now that there's an internet there, this completely invalidates how software was built. For us, it's these business models, right? There's a new business model that invalidates the existing incumbents, Oracle, SAP, ERP systems. And so it gives us a chance to build something brand new. That being said, if it really is something new, then you have to spend a lot of time, right, evangelizing it, but explaining to the world why the new thing is the new thing. And it takes time. And I remember the first time we convinced folks about a subscription-based business model, we came up with the term subscription economy in 2008, and it didn't work, right? We actually said, this is not working. Let's not use this term anymore, right? So we stopped using it. We tried like business cloud. We tried all these other things. And then in 2009, I think maybe like Netflix started truly transforming the subscriptions. And so we dusted off the term subscription economy, tried it again. And this time it really stuck. And so you need to try things. Same thing with investors. In 2004, when Salesforce went public, we had a hard time getting investors to understand the business model. I mean, they looked at it and they're like, you're losing money, you're going to lose money forever, right? Why would I want to invest in you? I don't understand why Oracle and SAP can't just take you guys out. And so Salesforce was not a runaway success in the initial years. It took like NetSuite, SuccessFactors, and a bunch of other SaaS companies to go public before people realized, okay, well maybe this is going to be real. So it took a long time.
Yeah, because you also mentioned the story of Adobe, who went from selling licensed software, 97% margin, to every couple of years to their clients, to this meeting, which must have been a pretty epic meeting, where I don't know if it was the CEO or the CFO came in and said, we're going to try to decrease our revenue as much as possible this month because we want to transition people to the subscription business. And you need these sort of because they knew that they were going to hit a wall if they continued in the direction that they were going. And so how do you trade, when you're talking to companies, how do you help them go through the trade-off between the short term and the long term and stuff like that?
Well, I think if you look at the marketplace, by then the marketplace started believing a little bit the SaaS model, right? That you saw a lot of other SaaS companies successfully go public, get acquired, so on and so forth. But there weren't a lot of stories of companies transitioning. And so the going in narrative in the world was that software companies, they couldn't transition. It was just too hard, right? And at Salesforce, we like to propagate that narrative as well. It was self-serving for us. And so Adobe was one of the first great examples of a company that can just do a hard transition, right? There's a couple of smaller examples like Concur that had done it over a long period of time, but Concur had such a hard time doing it. It was actually discouraging other companies from doing it. And so Adobe did it, but I'll tell you, I mean, Adobe, when we listened to the story, we had David Wadhwani, who's the general manager, come to our Subscribed event and tell the story. And I'll give you two aspects of it. One is, you're right, instead of taking money now, right, taking $300 for subscription suite or Creative Suite, we're going to now take $10 a month, $20 a month for Creative Cloud. And so revenues, of course, are down. And so they had their first quarter doing this, revenues dropped below $1 billion a quarter for the first time in like 10 years. Of course, profits dropped as well, and they did have to cut some folks. And so they, everybody knew this, but earnings comes out, the stock drops like 50, 60%. And the NASDAQ calls them up and says, after hours, do you want us to halt trading, like stop trading in the morning? And so they debated it for 3 hours, and they called NASDAQ and said, no, just open, right? Doesn't matter, open, because otherwise you're sending the wrong signal. You're not sending the signal that you're confident about this. And so they put 70 financial analysts in a room, spent 6 or 7 hours with them, explaining them the model. And by the end of the day, the headlines, what they wanted is Adobe uses transparency, right, to overcome. But when you listen to David Wadhwani talk, the amazing part of the story was not that. I mean, that really showed the courage of the story. But the essence of the story was, when we're selling this box, all we could think about is selling this box. And the honest truth was, we're selling fewer and fewer boxes every single year. And you can't see it in the revenues because we're raising prices. We're raising prices, so it looks like revenues are going up, but we're actually selling fewer units. And the consulting companies would say, just milk this thing, right? Just use it as a cash cow, right? Drop the cost, take the cash, and invest in the digital media business, the B2B omniture business. And but they said this doesn't make any sense, right? Digital manipulation of photos, the need for that is exploding, right? There's Photoshop, I mean, there's the iPad, there's Instagram, there's all these other things. And so how do we flip? And so if we stop looking at the box and we start looking at the customer, we see a very different picture, right? We see that even though we're innovating, our customers, because we ask them to pay another $300 for the new version, they stay on the old version. They stay on versions 3-4 years ago, and they're not taking advantage of any of our innovations. They were just refused to upgrade. And it doesn't make any sense. We can't give them the best experience we can. Our customers also have a lot more other needs that we don't think about because we just think about the box, right? And so things like Shutterstock is siphoning away a lot of revenues, right? They design the things in Photoshop and then they put it on Shutterstock to sell. Well, we should be doing that, right? There should be some little app from Photoshop that you can use. And so they said, look, we just need to reverse our thinking. We got to think about customers. We got to see our customers as professionals and hobbyists and just people playing around with Instagram. We should have products of different people, different price points, right? We could do acquisitions to expand our revenue footprint in these customers. And if you look at it today, Adobe is actually worth more than Salesforce.com. People are really surprised to know this. Their multiples are higher. They're actually worth more, and that transformation for them has been incredible. But it all started with just rethinking the business from a customer's point of view.
Yeah, so you touched on two things that I think are really interesting. The first is treating software as an actual service, and I think people, when you talk about SaaS, don't appreciate what software as a service means. It means that literally the product is constantly evolving, and that what you're trying to do is to give an outcome, not necessarily the product itself. And so I'm curious what you have to say about, other things as a service, essentially thinking about the product as something that's continuous and not something that's static and being shipped in time, being shipped somewhere. That's the first thing. And then the second thing you touch upon is, Adobe was sort of increasing its revenue, not by increasing its users, but by moving its pricing. And when entrepreneurs come in the family and they're saying, oh, I'm trying to, double revenue in the next 3 months, we often tell them, the easiest way to double revenue isn't to get twice as many users, it's to double your price. And so I'm just curious how you think about pricing when you're working with the companies that you work with.
Yeah, so two-part question. So we believe that everything should be a service, right? Everything should be a subscription service, and obviously That's why we exist, right? We're convinced of that. Internally, our vision that drives employees is we call it the world subscribed. And so everybody coming into the company has this belief that there actually has a logo. There's 3 concentric circles. The outer circle is all companies in the world. The middle circle is all companies that are in the subscription economy. And the middle circle is the companies that we power, right? So that gives us a very clear vision. And we want the middle circle, obviously, to take over and the inner circle to take over as well. So that gives us a very, very clear idea of what we want the future to look like. And people say, well, that's crazy. How could that happen? And so that's why we wrote the book. That's why we tell the stories, right? Our whole point of view is, look, it's not about taking your product and renting it, right? That's missing the point. It's about revisualizing your business from the customer on in. And when you do that, view the customer as a subscriber to your service, deliver the outcome that the customer really wants. And you can see that's the inspiration we're trying to convey with the video, right? Start with your customer, start with what they want. And every business has customers. And for I saw there's a few large companies in the room. The transformation that we're powering, we have a lot of startups, obviously, trying to take on the world, disrupt things, disrupt industries. But it's not clear because the big companies are the ones with customers. And so the question is, can Nike reinvent itself, right, and call it fitness before, a fitness startup really disrupts it, right? Can Coca-Cola, reinvent itself before something about thirst, right? What is the outcome that people are looking for, right? Reinvent itself. Can Ford or we're working with Renault and Peugeot here in France reinvent itself and before Uber takes over? Or if there are going to be self-driving cars, who can own the customer? Who can be a transportation brand to that self-driving car, right? And when you look at it, that's why for us the chapter in the book is called Transportation. And you guys have all the birds and limes. I miss them. The San Francisco is a stupid city. They took all the birds and the scooters out. And it's in here in Paris. It's nice to see them back.
It's worse in London. You can't even own your personal one in London.
What's that? That's right. It's worse in London. But you can see transportation is being reinvented, right? And when we wrote the book, the scooters weren't even out yet. Otherwise, we would have included them. But we see this as a transportation perspective. And so our perspective really is you can feel it, right? You can feel it in your personal lives that you're buying less and less stuff. When you want to get from point A to point B, you're not thinking about your car. You're thinking about what service, right? And so when consumer habits, when all our habits change, we used to have a product loyalty to the brand, right? To a brand loyalty to the product company, and now we're going to use a service. Our loyalty is up for grabs, and so all businesses, all sectors, are up for disruption, and it's not clear whether the large companies can say we'll transform fast enough, or a new entrant, a startup, maybe in this room, will take it over. So that's what that's what we're seeing happening. Pricing and packaging in this world is very different, and so it's not, because it's not a product. It's so much more complex, right? And when you look at growth in this new business model, it used to be you can sell more units, maybe you can raise the price of the units, right? But it's kind of weird. It's single dimensional, right? It's this product versus that product, right? Do I buy an iPhone? Or do I buy a Samsung, right? And it's one price. And this world is very different, right? Because you can price in different ways. You can price on different outcomes. You can price per gigabyte, per month, per year. There's so many variables. And in this world, if you want to grow, you can acquire more customers, or you can generate more revenue per customer. And most entrepreneurs underprice their product, right? You're set up to, right? You want everybody to use your product, so you want to get it out there. You're going to underprice your product. And a lot of times, if you take a step back and you look at it, pricing and packaging is probably one of the best ways that you continue the growth, right? Either, finding ways to continue to grow with your customers, finding easier ways for them to get in and then grow, right? Finding ways to reduce churn. Repackaging your products, right? Because you find that, we put all these features in they're not using. They didn't really value it when they purchased original products, so hold some of those capabilities back, because they don't. And the strange thing is that they didn't value it when they buy it, they don't use it, right? But if you have a chance to go back to them and talk about these other capabilities, it's a much more natural place for them to buy, and your business continues to grow. And so pricing and packaging is something. So for us, we literally revisit pricing and packaging now every year, right? Every year around this time, around Q4, is when we take a step back and say, well, what have we learned in the last year? And are there ways that we, if the answer is no, there's not a lot of changes we can do. You don't have to do it, but you always find some changes that you can do to continue to optimize your business.
Yeah, it's an important conversation to have regardless. So before we move on to your experience as an entrepreneur, I think the people in the room would be super surprised to hear that you managed to accomplish something in under a year with the French railway system. So you managed to launch a subscription offer with the SNCF. And so I'm curious to hear how that happened. Yeah,
SNCF, maybe I'll start the story and I'll take it back to a lesson for the folks in the room. So we talk about transportation. And people look at Uber and think it's a ride-sharing story, but from a consumer's standpoint, it's just about getting from point A to point B. And so here in France, a BlaBlaCar is more inner-city competition, and so SNCF realized that there's a whole generation of people. Like just out of curiosity, how many people have never taken the French railway to go from one city to another, right? Not the metro. Everybody has. Well, it's turned out a lot of millennials have not, or maybe it's Gen Z, because they take BlaBlaCar instead. And so they realize this, and they're saying, look, we're losing customers. And of course, they've got big systems, so if they wanted to launch something, it would take them 2 years. And so we went in there and said, look, we can launch something with you in 90 days. Why not work with us? And they did. They launched something in 90 days, and they got about 100,000 subscribers to sign up. I think it's 79 euros. All you can ride as a student, right? You gotta be in school, less than 27 years old, something like that. And 30% of these have never taken the French railway system before, right? And so they can see, okay, we're finally taking market share back from some of these disruptive services. And we'll see how it goes, but a lot of startups say, well, how do we get these large companies to use us, right? And how do we sign up these large companies? And you've got to find a need, right? You got to find a need, and so it's hard to have a good enough product that they can go without, right? Because there's a lot of organizational decision making that has to happen inside of the company. So if you want a company to make a decision for you, you got to understand that a few people have to get together to make that decision, all right? And so the need has to transcend every specific person. I would argue in consumer world it's like that too, right? Because even if all of us, making a decision for ourselves, there is a calculus in terms of, if I have my family, what is my spouse going to think? What are my kids going to think, right? Or what are my friends going to think, right? There's still a brand consciousness, a social consciousness to all decision making, but an organization is very, very pronounced. And so you have to find something that the organization says, this is important to us. But if you do, that's when they'll absolutely bet on a startup's product.
Great, thanks a lot for that. I think it'd be a good moment to speak about your experience as an entrepreneur and as a manager more particularly. So you worked at Salesforce for quite a while. You managed people there. And I was wondering how having worked in that growth phase, managing people there, helped you or didn't help you at all in being a CEO and now managing over 1,000 people.
I think you got to know who you are, right? And what drives you. And so, this is years ago. So the biggest organization I managed at Salesforce was probably 50, 60 people, something like that. Then I come to Zuora, right? We're like 0 employees, right? We're growing. We blow through 60 employees. It's like, well, it still feels okay. Get to about 150 employees, get to about 200 employees. And I've heard this now from so many other founders that I've spoken to. You go through this period where like you talk to everybody, and the feedback that you get back is, we have a bad culture, right? The leadership team here has no clue what's going on, right? The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, right? We don't really know what our values are, right? And talking to other CEOs, Everyone seems to have this experience. And so I wrestle with this, right? I wrestle with this, and I said, well, what is going on? Because a year ago, we didn't hear any of this stuff, right? A year ago, and what exactly changed between then and now? We're still doing the same thing. It's still the same people, more or less. And so what is going on? And so what I've since figured out is organizations go through these break points in size, where the old way of managing and leading and aligning and communicating break. And when you're not aware of it, then it's hard for people to do their work, right? And so, we got into a size where I needed to start aligning my direct reports, the leaders, the executives in the organization really, really well. Because if I didn't, they would send signals down the chain, and they would conflict. And so you'd have somebody here trying to get something done that depends on somebody over there, and that person has a different direction. And so all of a sudden, like, I can't do it. I can't get my job done because I'm dependent on this person. This person doesn't really care, right? And so then they start saying, well, we must have a messed up culture, right? They start saying, well, we don't really know what our values are, right? Because they're looking for unity. They're looking for unity and alignment. And then the question, well, why didn't it happen before? Well, before, I could actually figure out what everybody is doing, right? Because if you're less than 100, 150 people and you're at the top, you kind of know what everybody is doing. And we had just gotten to a place, I don't know what people are doing anymore. And they don't have enough interaction with me for me to influence them, right? And so I can influence fuzzy direction. I can influence a vision, but I couldn't influence the day-to-day work anymore, right? There's just too many layers and too many communications. But if I bound my team together and unified them, and we were all clear what it needed to be, and we understood what our dependencies were, then we can do that. And so there's a whole process of having to redefine how we lead, right? And what I also realized at the time was I'm not a great manager, right? That I don't delve into the details of what the people for me are necessarily doing on a day-to-day basis, right? I've got a direction that I'm setting. I've got my agenda. I sort of set a direction, and then what I need is I need folks that are good with aligning with me, and they can deal with the details. I also realized that when as a result, people that need a manager, that I wasn't the right person, right? And so I had to be really sensitive of what type of direct reports I can have. And so these are just things that you learn in the process of growing. I can give an exact same example. We didn't go through this, but I know a lot of other CEOs, founders, that go through a similar journey somewhere between like 20 and 30, 20 and 40 folks. It's growing from a 2-tiered organization to a 3-tiered organization. I felt it most going from a 3-tiered organization to a 4-tiered organization, right? I also see the reverse, where somebody from a bigger company drops into a smaller company, and they're basically managing like they're a 5-tiered organization or a 4-tiered organization, but like you really don't need to, right? You're much smaller than that. They're overdoing it, and it's actually slowing the organization down.
Great. So before we open up to questions, I want to do a little game of overrated versus underrated things. So I've
Overrated, underrated.
Yeah. And why, obviously, you think they're overrated or underrated. So I've prepared 3 things. So the first one is Tesla. Overrated or underrated?
Tesla. I think I would say it's overrated. Not because people don't love the cars, even though I'm starting to see that really starting to decline. People that said they would love the car 2 years ago now are saying I'm not so sure. I think Elon, look, hopefully he can create more change and more disruption, and the more the better. Hopefully he sends somebody to Mars, and so more power to him. But as a concept, I'm not convinced that just having an electric car fundamentally disrupts the car industry. I think the moat's not there. I think every car will have an electric car. Every car company can learn from Tesla, and I think the manufacturing scale is still really, really important in that business, and the time that Tesla will take to get to the scale of these companies will have transformed, and so I'm betting on the car companies, not
right.
Tesla.
So you think that there's this common thing where software people always think that hardware people's jobs are so easy, and people think that software people's jobs are so easy, and you're thinking Tesla's underestimating the difficulty of building the cars then.
I think if you just look at factories, workers, people, manufacturing parts, export, import, I mean, there's a supply chain. I mean, there's this gigantic infrastructure necessary. And if you look at the companies that are producing millions of cars a year, I don't know how Tesla catches up to that, right? And that's why they're so capital intensive, and that's why people are always afraid that Tesla's going to run out of money. And they might, if they slip a product cycle 1 year, they're out of money. I mean, that's how razor thin they are.
Okay, next up is ad-based business models.
Not a fan of ad-based business models. I think ad-based business models are destroying the fabric of our society. And so, not a fan. Not a fan. I think it fundamentally sets the place where there were ad-based business models was the newspaper industry, right? And fine separation between editorial and advertisement, right? So I'm going to create my product. I'm not going to be influenced by advertising. You guys over there sell it, right? And most of the industries are like that. There was a reason for that, right? There's a reason for that because otherwise the trust breaks down. And so what you're seeing with these internet businesses that are ad-based models is there's no trust. Surprise, right? It's the latest Facebook stuff that you see. They're fundamentally incented to go against your wishes, right? And so the structure and the model is just fundamentally broken. And I don't know how you get over that. I don't know how you get across that.
I think you can see it with free newspapers who've decided to rely completely on ads now. Is that editorials that are quite good, become
the
clickbait.
newspapers that are purely ad-based, it's just crap because they're just trying to get your eyeballs, right? You can just feel it. You can feel it in how you're using it, right? These sites, the headlines, they pop over to a new window. Instead of showing you the article, they show you 17 other articles with the hope that you'll click one of these other articles, right? You can feel the thing is set up against your natural desires, and you can feel Facebook, right? Facebook is, I don't know how many people notice LinkedIn. LinkedIn used to show the actual message of the person sending the message to you, right? And now they make you click on the link to go back to the site, right? Well, Facebook has always made you click on the link to go back to your site because they want you to go back to the sites to sell ads. Or somebody sends you a message, they want you to install the Messenger app on your phone. So I don't want to install the Messenger app on my phone. I just want to look at the message. And so the fundamental setup is broken.
You have a funny moment in the book where you say that if the New York Times had been created 10 years ago.
The best thing that happened in the New York Times was they gave up the advertising, right? They really focused on the subscription business. And I think 60-70% of the revenues now are the subscription-based business model. And again, we work a lot with these companies, and the newspapers and the magazines that embrace the subscription-based business model are just doing much, much better.
And it's not just Trump.
I don't think it's just Trump, right? I think that certainly helps. But for the longest time, the newspaper would say, okay, let's stabilize our business, but we got to solve the millennial problem because the millennials aren't paying for newspapers. And it just wasn't true. And the fastest growing subscriber segment of all these newspapers are millennials. I mean, they're realizing they pay. The millennials hit 30, they start getting involved in the world, they start having a family, they start, buying a house or whatnot, and they start becoming responsible citizens, and surprise, they're paying for news.
Hopefully not buying a house, subscribing to a house.
We'll see, yeah.
Last one in the overrated, underrated, CFOs in tech companies.
The CFOs have a really, really important role in the subscription-based business model. And just to kind of draw it out, right, there's not, how many people are in finance in the room? Only one person. Wow. So you got to go back and you got to hug your finance folks, right? So, there's a reason finance folks are called bean counters, right? No offense to the one finance person in the room, because the fundamental role of accounting, right? The word accounting was to count the dollars, so you can allocate it, and the income statement was basically saying I sold a unit, right? It could be a car, it could be a movie ticket, it could be a passenger seat, right, on a plane, whatever it is, and what were all the costs that went into that because that was the fundamental basis of this is what I meant by business school. Like business school, everything they teach you in business school is built on this concept, because the last 120 years has been about selling a unit, right? And everything is based on that. But these subscriptions, we talked about pricing. So I actually moved pricing and packaging to my finance department, because we're at a size where I have multiple product people. They all look at a sliver of it. No one's looking from the customer's perspective. And it's like, okay, well, I can give it to the salespeople. They're looking at it from the customer perspective. But that's like, there's an English phrase, right? Letting the fox guard the hen house, right? It's like, well, can't exactly give it to the salespeople. That would just be weird. And so, and then, we went public earlier this year, and a big part of talking to Wall Street is helping them understand the fundamental business model, right? The guy that drove Adobe's strategy was Mark Garrett, the CFO. I mean, everybody was involved, but Mark had a big role in it. And so in explaining this, the street was, well, here's how we price, and here's how it leads to an efficient business model that allows us to grow and continue to grow over time. And so the CFO has a big role in explaining the business model, right? Because these subscription-based business models are different. And so we could just feel that the CFO's department has to transform in this new world.
So one last question before I hand over questions to the audience. At the beginning of one of the chapters, you mentioned that as any good Francophile, you used to discuss over a bottle of wine what could be transformed to a subscription and what couldn't. And I'm wondering if there's anything that still counts.
Well, we used to, yeah. So, we used to play that game over wine. We're Californians, so we drink a lot of wine too. Though there's some folks that still stick with beer. And so we would play this game, right? What we do, like, how far could our business go? How far can we go? Is this really going to be that big, right? So you start challenging yourself, and you say, well, what type of businesses can we not sell to? And so, and you can see we obviously don't believe that today, but we had to go through our thinking, and we would talk about cement, right? It's like, well, you can't subscribe to cement. What does that mean? Then, we meet the floor company, right? We start talking about these tractors, right? It's like, yeah, people rent them, but how can you really do it? And then you saw the Caterpillar story, but Caterpillar's, the Japanese counterpart is Komatsu, and they have a video on YouTube about their smart construction effort, which is, you have a plot of dirt, and they send out the drones, right? The aerial map, the whole site. They download it to a CAD tool, and they do all the design on the CAD tool, and then they send all the instructions to these automated excavators, right? They're using GPS to do much more precise excavation than human beings can do, and so you can see this whole thing is just automated. And why would you buy the tractor, right? You would just say, well, I have a plot of land that looks like this. Maybe I'm building a golf course and it needs to look like that. And a service just goes out there and takes care of it for you, and you just pay based on the amount of dirt that needed to be moved. And so you can clearly see where this is going. And so, but early on, yeah, we talked about those things. We talked about houses. We'll see what happens to houses. But that's the game that we used to play.
Great. Well, now's time for questions from the audience. I know French people struggle a lot with asking questions, the trauma of school.
Really?
Yeah. You'd be surprised. I mean, it's like, when everyone was here, the front row
Not
was
startups.
the last row to fill up. It's like,
Not startups.
Yeah, okay, cool. Do we have a microphone to go around, or should I?
Hi. I heard you talk a lot about price and packaging, and I'm in a subscription model startup, and that's a big problem for us. And besides getting a great CFO, do you have any tips on or how to get about it, or sources of information of how to do it or anything?
The chapter we try to give at least a framework for thinking about it, right? And the thing about pricing and packaging is first of all, what is the unit that represents value? And we wrestled with this a lot, right? Is it the number of invoices? Is it the dollar of the invoice? Is it the number of subscribers, number of customers? And so we tested a lot of different versions. And one thing about pricing is the thing that allows you to change it is if you don't worry about your existing customers, right? first of all, if you're a fast growth company, then 2 years from now, when you look back, most of your customers are customers that you don't even have today, right? And you can always grandfather your existing customers, right? You don't have to, screw them over, and you can persuade them over time with the different pricing models. So think about pricing as a blank state going forward. Don't worry about your existing customers. Learn from them, but don't worry about them. And then what is the unit that represents value to them? And so we want to try. When you don't have to worry about existing customers, you can test different things. So we might have had 10 or 15 different ways of pricing that we were charging our customers for because we were trying different things, and every customer was on a slightly different thing. Eventually you learn, you gravitate towards something. And then the other thing you try to learn is what is the right price to start? And it's not clear whether that should be zero or it should be $250,000, right, per year, right? It's going to depend. It's going to depend on your space, and then how can you grow with your customers over time, right? Those are the puzzles that you're trying to solve.
Okay, thank you. So, but do you have any feelings about, you said you could change the pricing, about can you go up, go down, or is there a better way, start low and go up, start high and go down?
Well, your SaaS product, how many salespeople do you have?
Well, 0 for now.
0 now?
Well, we are our own salespeople. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you could just continue to inch up your pricing. So we started, because I was at Salesforce, I made the naive mistake of assuming that I'll just replicate Salesforce, right? The second company is going to be a piece of cake. I'll just do exactly what we did at Salesforce. It's all going to work out. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way, right? This thing was probably harder than Salesforce. Salesforce, our average deal price was $15,000, like $12,000, $15,000 in the early days. So we set a price where the average price is $15,000. And then we started selling. And I remember one of the salesperson came to me and said, will the price ever be more than $15,000 average? And I was like, no, it never is. And of course, I was completely wrong. So what we found is that our salespeople can only do 2 deals a quarter. And that $15,000 sit price assumed 4 deals a month. And so it wasn't going to work, right? Well, why can we only sell 2 deals a quarter? Because our sale is very different, right? At Salesforce, it's like, just try it. If you don't like it, you can cancel it. Billing is like, I can't try it. I got to make a decision. I got to spend a few months. I got to re-architect my product. It's a big decision for me. And so once I go in, I don't want to stop the decision. And so there's a lot of conversations that we need to have to get companies comfortable with it. So I call it a heavy decision when Salesforce was a light decision. So the only way it was going to work is if our average price, back then was $50,000. And now you can do the math. Our average price is in the 6 digits. And so I just went to the salespeople one day and I said, we're doubling the price. And of course, they were like, no, it's never going to work. It's never going to work. Surprise, surprise, it worked, right? So you just have to have the courage to try things out and really understand your buyer, right? Really understand your buyer.
Okay. And you grandfathered in the previous customers, so you didn't raise their prices, I imagine.
Eventually things happen, right? The product gets bigger and so on and so forth. But, we might still have a price. One customer from way back that's got some ridiculous price. And we just make them do lots of testimony for us.
Okay, thanks.
In exchange. Yeah.
Hey, Tien.
Oh.
I'm the founder of a private travel community, and actually Taiwan is one of our biggest market.
Really?
And
It's it's like a social network community?
Yeah, like just for travelers, and it's private.
Oh, travelers, yeah.
Yeah, and so my question is more towards like community building. Like I run a subscription business, and many communities do so. So how do you see the intersection between building communities and making people pay for it, like monthly, on a subscription basis?
I think those are two different things. I think, look, the tension for you might be if I make people pay, my community is smaller, right? And so the way around that is always some freemium thing, right? And so, and then you got to work out the math. The generalized math, and you can only go so far at generalized math because everybody's a different situation, is you need some single-digit %, right? Medium to high single-digit % of your free subscribers to convert to a paid subscriber, right? And you can have a smaller %, but then you need like a lot of free users, right? You need like tens of millions of free users, if not hundreds of millions. So You know, if you're selling to Taiwan, you're probably not going to get that many free users, unfortunately, right? So you got to look at that. You got to look at, you know, do I have the ability to get 10, 15, 100 million? If I only have the ability to get 1 million, 2 million free users, then my conversion rate to paid needs to be higher, right? And that's the stuff to work out.
Yeah, but then like, you know, you could be small and work on the private aspect and just have paid users. And be small
So
and,
then it depends, right? You know, Yelp versus AngieList is a good example. AngieList stuck. This is a U.S. Think about it as rating restaurants and plumbers and things like that. And AngieList decided to keep it paid and totally private. And in that market, Yelp overran them, right? Because the free was the free to get the information was too important. And so that wasn't a good idea, right? So you have to look at how important that the community actually is. It sounds like for you it is important. So just not knowing what it is, but just the fact that the way you've described your company.
Hi.
Yeah.
Do you have any current challenges in Europe as compared to your US-based business model?
No, we don't. I mean, so the nuance, look, Europe, I think the idea that something starts in the US and goes to Europe 2 years later, I think that idea is 10 years old. That's just not true anymore. I think for us, the subscription economy is something that definitely is universal. And so we don't see that in one region, right? Why is that? Because what drives it is the internet, mobile phones, and all, you know, cloud computing, and all these things, and all those are universal things. Are there going to be regional differences? Yeah, absolutely. The nice thing about the U.S. is it's a big homogeneous market, but there's downsides too. And so I think if you look at our teams in Europe, they're used to working in the U.S. market. The employees are very spoiled, right? Because they've got an overall infrastructure around them, and whether you're going down to Australia or European companies, they're used to working with much less in their local geographies, and they're used to going much deeper. You know, there's cultural things in Germany. You know, they don't trust the internet, right? So you have to overcome that. It doesn't mean they can't, right? But their basic thing is a lack of trust of the internet. So you've got to overcome that. But otherwise, you know, there shouldn't be anything. I will say that when I look at international, and this is changing too. It's the language that people engage with the internet is probably one of the more dominant factors still. And so the U.S., the U.K., and Australia and Canada, they really operate as one block. There's very, very little difference between those regions. The Nordics, you know, half the interaction with the internet feels like it's in English, right? The worst is going to be, you know, like Japan. Like, I don't think they read the internet in English, right? As an example, right? So it's not. So they tend to be more of an isolated market, and you got to really go in with that language. You know, France is mixed. The biggest companies and the startups engage, right? But the middle market, you have to do it in French. So things like that are more the dominant factors.
Yeah. Hi, Tien. So after Netflix and Apple Music and Spotify, what do you think is the next big consumer subscription-based model in the future? What's next?
So we don't think, for us, it doesn't have to be $10 a month. So we see Uber as a subscription-based business, right? And why is that? Because it's a service. They have your ID, so you use your Uber ID. They have your credit card. They have chosen to monetize on a per ride basis, while Spotify has chosen to monetize on a per month basis. But there's nothing to stop Uber from, you know, going to more mixed models, just like Amazon has, right? And there's nothing to stop Spotify from having a free service where you pay per song if they one day decided that makes sense, right? And they all have their constraints, right? Spotify has their royalty fees they have to think about, right? And Uber has, you know, the physical infrastructures and the payments to the drivers they have to think about. But there's ways to mix that all up. And so we see that, you know, we see there's all these services in food, Food's turning out to be a hard thing. There's a lot more services in health, right? So you're seeing the local gym, Peloton, ClassPass, right? A lot of these services really start to blend together, and it's more, I have, $20, $40 a month to spend on health, and where am I going to spend it? In the U.S., MoviePass is finally introducing subscriptions. In France and other places, you guys have always had, subscription-based movie passes. And so, but if you look at MoviePass, they're really trying to compete with Netflix, right? And that's why the movie theaters, if they were smart, would embrace this, because if the more I'm into Netflix, the less I'm going to go spend another $20 to go to the movie theater. But if I have $20 a month or $10 a month for Netflix and $20 a month or $10 a month for the movie experience, then I might go back and forth, right? And so it all comes down to that consumer experience.
Hi. In terms of B2C subscription services, what is your view on companies that make it quite difficult to cancel their subscriptions? And do you think that the short-term benefits in terms of customer retention and zombie accounts makes it for the loss in terms of reputation and customer satisfaction?
There's so many examples of companies, you just feel it, right? As a consumer, you try to do something, okay, this company is being stupid, right? And so there's going to be a lot, right? We're in a transition state. A lot of the larger companies are trying to learn. Now, if you compare that to 10 years ago, right, we're in a much better place, right? Our expectations now of the services that we use are so much higher now, and so brands, are evolving, and they're forced to go to a higher and higher place. Every time you use something where it feels like they haven't innovated in there, it's frustrating, right? And so we're going to see that. And so there's definitely, look, everything's going to get better and better, right? Because the system and the trends are forcing it to. I would say, though, that as a decision, if you're trying to decide your own thing, it's not necessarily true that easy is always the way to go, right? Because sometimes it depends. Sometimes if you make it too easy, you're getting a bunch of customers that are simply going to churn out later, right? So you really have to understand the product, the customer, and what you really, really want. And sometimes it's better to have a higher level, right, to filter out the customers that you might not want, and actually have the customers that are committed, right? And sometimes it's good to put tests in front of the customers where they, so simple example, right, is you would think that if you want people to sign up for your service, then asking for a credit card up front before they even see the service is a bad thing, right? Just let them all in. Because if you put that credit card, you're putting a big filter. Every company that we've worked with so far, right? I don't know if it's every company, but most companies have tested it both ways and found that they prefer the credit card up front, right? And they could say, look, I'm not going to charge you, right? You can cancel in 15 days, but that simple decision of saying, do I really want this thing, right? Actually filters in customers that are good customers. And so they found that it works better. Again, I wouldn't say that's universal. You can always test, but it's not necessarily true that putting barriers or filters in front of the customer is by default a bad thing.
Hi. What do you think about the engagement in the subscription model? For example, Tinder, they monetize the flexibility. For example, the 6-month subscription costs much less than 1 month subscription, but it's not the way the Netflix does. What's your opinion on this engagement and the flexibility?
Yeah, a lot of it is going to come back to the service itself, right? First of all, engagement is important. Simple story, early on in Salesforce, right? Really, really early. And so we didn't understand the subscription economy. We didn't understand this. And we're seeing what our customers are doing. And for us, it was a shock to actually see what customers are doing, because we all came from the software industry and again, early days of the internet. And one of the engineers said, these are the best customers because they never log into the system, but they pay us money, right? Because they take no cost and they're just giving us money. It's like, that doesn't make sense. And of course, those are the customers that stop using and stop paying. And so engagement is really, really important. It really is going to depend on the thing. So I would suspect Netflix versus Tinder. I would suspect that Netflix has very low churn. I think when Netflix used to be a DVD company, the churn was relatively high. It was higher. I don't know what it was, right? But there was a hassle to wait for the DVD to come, and a lot of people would have the same DVDs. After 4 months, I didn't really use Netflix, right? Because it was easier to go to Blockbuster. I didn't want to send the DVD back and another DVD, so I just canceled. So that time when they raised prices, I think 20% of their customers canceled. I suspect those customers just weren't using Netflix, and it was a reminder to cancel. I don't think anybody cancels Netflix now, right? It's like TV, right? You know you're going to want to watch TV. You know you're going to want to watch Netflix, so you don't cancel. And so they don't need to play games like that. I suspect Tinder is not something you use forever, right? You know, maybe some people do, right? You know, who knows? You know, like I've never used Tinder, unfortunately. I got married way before Tinder was created, so I don't really know. But I suspect that you only tend to use Tinder for a brief period of time. And so they're encouraging you to use it longer because they're going to lose you anyway, right? And so their calculus is just very, very different. And in the US, I mean, Blue Apron is a good example, right? Blue Apron went public, didn't do well, the stock dropped a lot. I don't know. You know, Blue Aprons, they send you a box, right, of raw ingredients, and you cook. You cook the food. It's simple to cook. They measure all the ingredients for you, but you still have to cook. I think Blue Apron was really a novelty. It was really interesting. You do it a few times, and then you stop doing it. And so I don't think Blue Apron is set up to be a subscription business, right? It should have been a one-off sales, maybe through Amazon or Whole Foods or something like that. But because they try to position it as a subscription business, and they probably had really, really high churn, and you can see it as public, that it was problematic, right? And they were spending too much money to look like it was growing when the underlying service was not a sticky service. And so, you know, that you have to look at engagement really at that level, right? Is this an ongoing part of their lives and they're never going to churn? Or is this something that, look, on average, they'll churn once every 3 years, once every year, once every 6 months? For Tinder, it sounds like it's somewhere between 3 and 6 months is when customers tend to churn. But they have a lot of new customers coming in, so who knows?
So I've been selling subscriptions quite successfully for 2 years to audio and video language classes. And I have 2 types of subscription. I have a monthly subscription and a yearly subscription. And
yearly.
Yearly, yes.
Yeah, do the yearly. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah.
Because well, I try to make them by the yearly ones because it comes out 25% cheaper than the monthly ones. But some of them, they still stay like for 2 years and more with the monthly ones. And so how can I kind of motivate people to switch to the yearly subscriptions?
I mean, if they're using monthly, so give them choice, right? Definitely give them choice. And but here's what I would suspect, given your product. I would suspect a lot of people start using it with the best of intentions, and then they give up after a month or 2. No?
No, actually, they're quite motivated.
They're quite motivated?
Yes.
So you don't see anybody giving up?
Well,
I could be wrong.
Actually, I think I have like maybe 5% leaving after 6 months, so they're quite motivated.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about canceling the monthly ones at all, completely, and just keeping the yearly ones. But because some of them stay for so long, and the monthly ones come out actually better for me financially.
I mean, if you have no churn, then, but that's the math, right? So.
It's just easier with the yearly ones. I mean, it's just.
Well, we can help with that, but it is better cash flow, right? To do it yearly for a certain extent, right? Once you're at scale, at some point it stops mattering. At some point, and it's also nice just for the companies that are at scale. I mean, that's why Netflix doesn't bother, where you just get the same amount, right? It's so predictable. Every month, the same amount goes in the bank. Right, you could just manage that really, really well at scale, right? But the early days, when you're trying to finance the company, then annual sometimes does help. But again, all you're doing is taking future money, so eventually it catches up to you, right? Eventually it shouldn't matter. I think either the more dominant thing is that churn characteristic, right? And the reason I was guessing annual, and I could be wrong, is what I was hoping is if you do have a problem where they try it for a month or 3 months or 4 months, is at least you have a year, right? And you can watch what they're doing. And if they stop using it, you can encourage them, right? You can send them emails. You can send them encouragement to kind of stay with it, stay with it, stay with it, and maybe they get over the hump. The classic picture for if you look at cohorts, right? So this is everybody that signed up this month, everybody has signed up this month, everybody has signed up this month. And for B2B companies, it's more like quarters, right? Or sometimes even years, but think about it as quarters. But it's the same model. Is you see a drop. Right, because some percent of the people try it for a month or 2 or 3 and they stop using it, and then eventually it comes back up. And the question for these businesses is, does it come back up forever, right? It just kind of grows like this, or does it level off, right? But there's still a slow decline, or does it level off even and then flatten out, right? So if it levels for a slow decline, that's okay. But that's just not as good as a business that levels off and flat because you have a stable or just continues to grow. It's a little hard to continue to grow in a B2C business. So it usually just sort of levels off because how do you get them to go back and spend more money and more money and more money, right? But if it's a sticky product, eventually you might be able to play around with price increases and things like that. But that's the key. But there's always like a drop. And what I was trying to do is just extend the time period where you can work it out and minimize that drop.
So I'm afraid that's all the time we have tonight for questions. Tien, thanks again so much for coming.
Of course. Thank you.